Hello, brilliant entrepreneur. It's Tash Corbin here, and welcome to another episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. This is episode number 295, which means you can find all the relevant links and show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/295. In today's episode, I'm sharing with you the 5 big list growth mistakes that I see people make, especially in online business, and of course, what to do about them. So if you know your list needs some attention, you've been putting it off, or you just want to make sure that you're not making some of the big mistakes that I see, then this episode is for you. Let's dive on in. I'm Tash Corbin, and this is the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. You've probably heard this dozens of times before, but list growth is critical, especially for online business. You don't own your audiences on social media platforms, and you cannot move them to other platforms. If you decided to move from Facebook to LinkedIn tomorrow, you cannot move your Facebook followers over to LinkedIn and still have them following you there. When it comes to your list, if you decide to change email service providers, your list is your asset. You get to take them with you. So it's a great way to future-proof your business and really look after your business growth by building an asset. A list is an asset. However, it's beyond risk mitigation for me. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about list growth, it's all about the fear and this like big risk of Facebook might shut down, which I actually don't think is particularly likely. But it is good to have a safety net and all of those sorts of things. I'm all for mitigating the risk. But I think that mitigating the risk is not enough of a motivator for a lot of people because they are very open to risk, or they just think, well, the risk of that happening is so low that I won't really worry about it. But when it comes to growing your list, there's so many more benefits beyond risk mitigation. And the big one that I want to talk about is this compounding interest effect. If you started consistently growing your mailing list with 100 people a month 4 years ago, your list would be so warm, so large, and so much more valuable to your business than if you got the equivalent number of people to sign up to your list today. So let's say over the last 4 years, you could have grown your list by 5,000 people, or you can pay and get 5,000 people on your list today. Which would I prefer? I would prefer the 5,000 that I got over time. Why? Because the longer someone has been on your mailing list, the more likely they are to be a hot audience member, the further through your messaging ecosystem they are, and the more likely they are to buy something from you when you are next in launch. So the best thing you can do to look after your future sales in your business, and particularly in the long term, is grow your list now, rather than waiting to some future date, some future launch when you're going to go and start growing your list then. The people who join my mailing list during a launch are the ones who are least likely to purchase in that launch. And that is true of most niches and most businesses. So it's a way for you to look after the long-term growth and sales of your business. However, there's also a short-term benefit because as people join your list, for those people that are particularly hungry to work with you, there will be 1 to 3% of people who join your list and are interested in something pretty quickly. You're also bringing in those shorter term sales. So there's a short-term return on investment and a long-term return on investment. So it's not just about compound interest. It's like having an investment where you put money in, you buy an investment and it pays you back immediately. I just knocked my laptop. It pays you back immediately and you also get future returns. So list growth is a really sexy part of your marketing strategy, and yet so many people put it down the list. Wait until later. And so what I want to do with you today is cover the 5 big mistakes that I see and what to do about them. So first and foremost is not prioritizing your list growth, and in particular, not prioritizing consistent list growth. There are a lot of people that I see, especially as they come into the Takeoff program and they've already been in online business for a little while, where they did some list growth 9 months ago and then they didn't focus on list growth for a while. And then they had some list growth 3 months ago and now they haven't done any list growth since. If you have these sort of flash and crash strategies where you have big groups of people joining and then no one joining, big groups of people joining and then no one joining, and particularly if they're spaced months and months apart, then it's not necessarily going to have the same effect as having people join consistently. It's very easy for the gaps in your list growth strategies to span 6 months and then all of a sudden 9 months, and then it's stretched out and you had list growth on your list at the start of the year, yet it's 12 months later and you've not really done anything to grow your list. So it's prioritizing list growth, but also prioritizing that consistent list growth. Now, for those of you who are in the early stages of growing your list and you don't have a proven value proposition message yet, you're still refining, the way I recommend you consistently grow your list is through regular webinars. In the Takeoff program, I recommend that my students run one webinar every month, because that means every month you've got some new people joining your mailing list, but you're also having a portion of your existing mailing list coming to a live event and therefore likely to convert into buying something from you. So running regular webinars is great in those early stages of business because it brings in a short-term cash injection and looks after long-term list growth on a consistent basis. But you do need to run them regularly. Once you've got that nailed and you know what topics bring people in, you've got a very systemized way of getting your promos out there, and you know that you can get 50 to 100 people signed up to webinars very regularly, then I would also have an evergreen opt-in for evergreen list growth. So something where people can sign up for something, get it straight away and do it straight away. So that might be a pre-recorded training of some kind, a checklist, a template, an ebook, a video training series, an audio download. So there's a bunch of different things that you can do for evergreen opt-ins. So I recommend that you build one that works really well and does its job of attracting your ideal clients and converting the hot ones quickly, and set that up on Evergreen for your evergreen list growth. At first, for an evergreen opt-in, I recommend that you just focus on organic promotion. So get out there and share it the way you would your webinar normally, and get a good 100 or 200 people through from your organic audience. And then you can start investing in paid advertising of that opt-in as well, once you know that it does its job. Its job is to grow your list and to get those early conversions from your hottest audiences. So once you know it does those two things, you can then start investing in ads because you know you're going to get the return on investment. So that is mistake number one, not prioritizing list growth and not prioritizing it consistently. Mistake number two is perfectionism over progress. So rather than just getting that webinar up every month and refining and working on it as you go, seeing what works with your audience, so many people are still putting their webinar into 6 months and 9 months into the future because they need to have everything mapped out exactly and perfectly. But no great webinar was built on theory. The first thing that will happen when you run your first webinar is that you will realize what you need to update and change about that webinar. And if you're working with a mentor, you can go through that process of reviewing it together to see what changes need to be made. That's how you get a really great high performance webinar. The first time I run any of my webinars is its least effective run. The more I run it, the more I practice it, the more I refine it to do its job, the better that webinar performs. So rather than waiting for the perfect thing, having to write the perfect opt-in page, the perfect email sequence, have the perfect opt-in, just get something out there, but make sure that you review it and learn from it. Make sure that you aren't just throwing out webinar after webinar and scattergunning a bunch of different webinar topics and not actually taking stock of what works, what does its job, and what doesn't do its job. Number 3 mistake is having some list growth, but then giving your audience the silent treatment. the silent treatment. So I always say this is like saying that there's a big party at your house, inviting everyone to a party at your place, and you're not there. There's no one there to give them a drink. There's no one there to tell them where the bathroom is. Everyone's just kind of standing around not talking to each other because they were invited to this party and nothing's happening. So if you're going to grow your list, you want to make sure that you are looking after the people that jump in. One high connection lead, someone on your list who came to you because they were interested in your webinar or they were interested in that thing that you had created and they found you on social media organically, is so valuable to your business. They might not convert straight away. They might not be a paying customer ever, but they are interested in what it is that you are sharing. They've signed up and given you their email address, so there's a level of trust there, and they potentially are an engaged audience member, someone who has enough trust in you to refer their friends through to you, someone who can help spread the word. Like, there's so many benefits to having people on your mailing list, but you've got to look after them. So prioritize the list that you have before going out and chasing thousands and thousands more people onto your mailing list. I once had a VIP client who signed up to me and she said, look, I've been growing my list for the last 2 years and I really want to start emailing them, but I still don't have my first 1,000 subscribers. And I was like, what do you mean? She said, I haven't emailed them yet because I was told I need 1,000 subscribers before it makes sense for me to be investing time into sending emails to my mailing list. I was like, what are the people going to do who signed up to your list 2 years ago? When you send them an email, they're not even going to remember who you are. They won't remember your name. So if you are going to focus on list growth, please be sure that you're regularly emailing your list. Now, for a lot of people, the big reason why they don't email their list consistently is because they feel that they're being spammy or they don't have anything to offer, or they're worried that they're sending too many emails. If you're sending an email a week to your audience, you are not sending too many emails, right? If you're sending an email a day, yeah, we might need to talk about, looking at whether that's appropriate for your audience. For some audiences, it might be, but definitely don't give them the silent treatment. For most people listening to this podcast, your problem isn't that you email your list too much. It's that you don't email them enough. So look after, prioritize and nurture the audience that you have if you go to all the trouble of growing your audience. The fourth big mistake that I see people make is using toxic marketing strategies with their mailing list. And there are far too many of these to mention. You've probably had them happen to you. But rather than go through a ginormous list of all the toxic marketing strategies that are used on emails, instead, I just want you to consider whether you're burning your leads by spamming them too much. So something that I have seen taught in launch strategy is to send 17 emails in the 3 to 5 days that your cart is open. For me, that is far too many emails, right? So there's that churn and burn of, if people don't buy from you within the first 30 days, cut them off your list, send them a guilt-laden email about why you're disappointed or, oh my gosh, have I done something wrong? Is it something that I've said? All of that is gross. Don't do that to people. Be really mindful of how you would like to be treated and how you'd like to be spoken to is a really beautiful rule of thumb to just start there. So first and foremost, don't send far too many emails. Secondly, don't treat your audience or your mailing list as just a bunch of numbers. And if they don't buy from you when you send them 6 emails in one day, well, they were never going to be your client anyway. So farewell to them, right? So rather than looking at it that way, think about each person on your list as a human being who expressed some interest in your work and who is potentially interested in working with you at some point. If you think about them that way and speak to them that way, write to them that way and treat them that way, in most cases, you're going to avoid a lot of those toxic marketing strategies. I'll ensure that I include a link to a recent podcast that I did on the difference between consent-driven and toxic marketing strategies so that you can find out more on that episode if you're interested. First and foremost, the way to fix the toxic marketing strategy part is just focus on consent-based and consent-driven strategy. So if you have been told you should use guilt-ridden language, Is it something that I've done? Oh, can you please tell me why you didn't buy from me? I don't understand. What have I done? Oh, please, let's be besties. That kind of stuff. The reverse psychology stuff. Like, have you ever had a list where the unsubscribe button is actually like a really passive aggressive statement? Like, I'm not interested in changing my life anymore, or I just don't want to achieve big goals anymore. All those. I've seen it. It's absolutely horrible. I once unsubscribed from a mailing list that was about pet subscriptions, like pet boxes, subscription boxes. And the confirmation button to unsubscribe popped up and said they'd put my dog's name in there, Munchkin, and it said, I don't care about Munchkin anymore, or I don't love Munchkin anymore. And that's what I had to click in order to unsubscribe from their mailing list. That is completely toxic. I don't care how sassy you think it is. I don't care how funny you think it is. I don't think that is something that's appropriate to be doing to your audience. Like, imagine if Munchkin had died and I had to click a button that says, I don't love Munchkin anymore. Like, oh, that is absolutely disgusting. Anyway, but even just some of those more passive aggressive, or, those ones like, oh no, I'm not interested in a bargain. Oh no, I'm not interested in my future growth. Oh no, I don't want to achieve big goals in the future. Those kinds of things that use the reverse psychology, I don't agree with any of that in your email strategy. And then there are other toxic marketing strategies, such as using that, like future pacing, people's fears, dialing up their pain points, being aggressive or abusive on email. You'll be surprised how much this is taught. I once was subscribed to someone's mailing list where I got an email every day. I don't know why I stayed subscribed so long. This was back in 2014. And every day she sent me an email that was, the subject line was, you're not going to make it, or you're making a mistake, or why are you so lazy, right? It was all these things. It was trying to get a rise out of me and have me, prove that I was hungry and that I wanted it. But actually, it was very aggressive and it was almost borderline abusive to have that in my inbox every single day. I can't believe I put up with it so long, honestly. But I am very much someone who doesn't agree with a lot of those toxic marketing strategies. And I think it's a mistake to treat your list as a bunch of people that are faceless and dehumanize them, and use some of those really abusive language and abusive and manipulative strategies to manipulate people through guilt-laden, shame-ridden type language or strategies. Another big one that I've been quite passionate about recently is I'm seeing a resurgence in content, especially on Instagram Reels, that say, is your business not making sales? Well, you don't have a business, you just have an expensive hobby. And it's labeling your business as a hobby to induce shame, right? That is actually shame driven. So what they're trying to say to you is, because your business isn't successful enough, because you're doing something wrong, you don't even have a business. Your little business is actually a hobby. It's actually ridiculing and minimizing what it is that you have. Don't ever let anyone ever label your business as something other than a business. That's up to you to decide whether you have a business or not. It's not for someone else's judgment. Anyway, I could get very ranty about the whole consent-driven / toxic marketing strategies. I won't go too deep in that, but as I said, I'll put a link to one of my previous podcasts in the show notes. And then the final big mistake that I see people make with list growth is that they separate list growth from their sales strategies. Now, there's a little bit in this, so bear with me, but people come to me a lot in the Takeoff program and on social media, asking questions, coming to my live events, and they've got an idea for a webinar. And they say, is this a good webinar topic? And my first question is, what are you selling on it? And they're like, oh, well, I haven't really thought about what the upsell would be yet. And that's actually backwards. Every lead magnet that you create, every opt-in, every freebie that you create in your business needs to be directly linked to a product or service. If you create, and this is for you and your audience's benefit, if you create a bunch of webinars or free resources or free videos that go nowhere, It's like your audience have asked you for directions and you have sent them down a dead end. You have sent them literally down a dead end because there's nowhere else for them to go from there. So your list growth strategy needs to be directly connected to your sales strategy. If you build a lead magnet or an opt-in with an upsell in mind so that it actually takes people through the process of solving the problem that they want to solve and helping them understand what the next logical steps are, then it's better for your audience and it's better for your business. Growing your list with a bunch of opt-ins or lead magnets that go nowhere can lead to you having a ginormous list of people who are trained not to purchase anything from you, who you have trained that you are just here to give them a bunch of free resources, and if they want further support, they have to go somewhere else because you don't offer it. So make sure that if you're going to go into this space of growing your list, that you do it strategically and that it is inherently connected to your sales strategy as well. So that means that your opt-ins, your list growth should therefore speak directly to your niche and be aligned with the value proposition and messaging that you have crafted to promote your products and services. So all of these pieces go together and are on the same foundations. So these are my 5 big list growth mistakes. I hope that you found this really helpful. If you have any questions for me, I have a really cool new free thing that we are going to start playing with for some of the episodes of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. And this is the first time we're doing it, so it's a little experiment. But what I want to do is have a pinned pod in the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs Facebook group. And this is going to be our first pinned pod. So what that means is when this podcast episode goes live, I'm going to pin an announcement at the top of the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs Facebook group. It will have hashtag pinned pod and then the episode number, episode 295. And on that pinned pod, I'm going to have a little summary of today's episode, some questions for you, and it's the place in the comments where we can keep the discussion going. You can ask me further follow-up questions, or you can make a commitment and create that sense of accountability for yourself. So if you've been listening along to this and you're like, oh, I have not been prioritizing consistent list growth, I have been getting a little perfectionisty, and I was thinking my next list growth thing was just going to be some freebie that didn't have an upsell, then this is your opportunity to make a commitment that you are going to focus on list growth, that I'm going to release a new webinar and it's going to come out in the next 3 weeks, right? So you can come and make a commitment and let me know what you've got out of this episode, but also I'm there to answer any follow-up questions you might have as well. So head on over to the Heart-Centered Soul-Driven Entrepreneurs group. We'll have the link to the pinned pod post in the show notes of today's episode as well. And I look forward to seeing how this little experiment goes and continuing the conversation with you over there as well. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. Until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now. Would you like more tips, tools, and resources to help you grow your heart-centered business? Head to tashcorbin.com today.